Hello, and welcome to Nutanix Database Service Tech Talk. My name is Jeremy Launier, Senior Principal in our Product Management team. I'm joined by Mohammed Karam, also Senior Principal in our Product Management team. And today we'll be talking about the latest release of NDB 2.9. Before I get started, I want to just kind of explain some logistics. If you have questions during the session, please use the Q&A function in the webinar, and Mohammed or one of the other PMs that has joined the call, Raghu, who's joined the call, will try to answer those offline. If it's really important, they'll interrupt me during the session, but we do have a dedicated Q&A session towards the end of the presentation, so we'll try to use that as much as possible. Okay, let's just jump into it. So, for those of you that are not that familiar with NDB, I just want to spend a minute and kind of explain what NDB is first before we get into what's new. So, the best way to think of it is NDB is a control plane for managing database management across on-premises and the public cloud on top of NC2. It's a software stack that runs on Nutanix infrastructure, and it provides a graphical interface, REST APIs, CLI, even a Kubernetes operator way of connecting to this control plane. And from there, you can provision and manage your databases. That's provisioning, then cloning of databases, scaling of databases, patching, and then, of course, point-in-time backup recovery. For many of you that may know, and some of you may not know, we do support a wide range of the most popular database engines. So that includes Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle database, of course, also includes Postgres and MongoDB, and MySQL. We have some support we have good support for EDB, which is an enterprise variant of Postgres, and we also have some support for MariaDB as well. And that whole stack can run on top of Nutanix infrastructure as a virtual machine on AHV or ESX, on-prem or in the public cloud on top of NC2. So customers can have the same experience managing their databases in the cloud as they do on-prem. So I would be remiss if I didn't spend a minute just to highlight the pace of new feature capabilities that the NDB team has rolled out in the last 9 months. So I just kind of want to quickly highlight that. So the latest release that we just came out at the end of September was 2.9, but we had two releases before that, 2.8 and 2.7, all of which are packed with feature capabilities. So if you're running on an older build than 2.7, we definitely encourage you to upgrade. If you haven't used NDB before, just go right to the new one that has the most and the latest from a feature capability, a quality perspective, and obviously security enhancements. There are a couple of key themes for our 2.9 release that I want to highlight, and then we'll go into more details on each of these areas of improvements. And in fact, Mohammed is going to be doing a deep dive on the first topic, including a live demonstration. But I'll just kind of provide some quick highlights here. So a couple of key themes. One, we've made some significant new product capability around how to support and manage disaster recovery. And we're starting with Oracle database and then planning to extend that to other databases as part of our roadmap. But we'll really show you some examples of how we do this with Oracle, which is a really, really amazing experience. There's also been some continued enhancements to our time machine. For those of you that participated or sat in on previous tech talks, you know that we have been focusing a lot on enhancing time machine. In 2.8 and in 2.7 in the past, we added a lot of improvements around health monitoring and health visibility of time machine. In this release, we've continued to enhance the time machine by now including more sophisticated storage usage reporting, both at the cluster level across time machines, snapshots, clones, things like that, which encompass both snapshots and the log backups, but also individual usage per database server as well and per database. So a lot more information about how much storage is actually being used behind the scenes, not just for the primary storage that the database is using, but also for any underlying backups that are related to that data. There's been some database engine enhancements. So one of the features that Mohammed will spend, maybe he can talk about a little bit later, but one of the areas that he's been focused on is introducing more robust experience for MySQL. So in this release, we're starting on that journey. We're not fully done yet, but what we've done is we've added production grade support for provisioning highly available MySQL database clusters. This is, I say production grade because it's GA, it's ready to be used, but it's limited to API CLI today. Our intent in the future is to add that to the GUI and also add all of our other lifecycle management. But today, you can from the API and the CLI, you can provision highly available MySQL clusters. We also did a great enhancement around SQL Server, which is kind of related to the Time Machine, but it's also very SQL Server specific, and that is to support be able to create lots of different database backup groups where you can group databases as part of a single backup policy and backup schedule. And the consequence of that is that it makes it a lot easier if you have database servers where you have a whole bunch of databases and you need to be able to back them all up, and which has been somewhat challenging in the past because of Microsoft volume shadow copy service limitations. So we've done some enhancements to really get around that to support backups of really dense database configurations. There's been multiple security enhancements. Of course, there's always the CVEs that we plug every single release, so I'm not going to go over those details. But two specific enhancements I want to highlight is on the Windows SQL Server side. We have in NDB, we use WinRM in multiple areas for initial deployment of NDB software and some other things like that. So now that entire process is entirely over HTTPS. And so that's a much more secure way of doing the kind of communication we have to do between the control plane and the database server. And the second thing is for Linux-based systems, we have validated and have full support for Linux SE Linux enforcing mode. So now if you do have that requirement, you can run that with full confidence that that'll work with all of NDB's automation. And the last capability that we'll talk about in more detail is you can now, there's now a documented process. It's not fully automated, it's like semi-automated, but there's a documented process that we have tested and validated, we have customers using that can be used to back up the entire NDB deployment and then be able to recover that to a previous point in time. So you can use that for protection against ransomware and some other things like that. So those are the kind of highlights. I'm going to jump into more details now. And again, if you have questions, feel free to ask them offline in the Q&A section. And then if it's really time sensitive, Mohammed can interrupt me and I can respond to it. Otherwise, I'll take the questions. I'll respond to the questions at the end. Okay, so let's talk first about disaster recovery. And for this, Mohammed, why don't you say a few words?
Sure, perfect. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, basically, this is one of the features, as Jeremy had alluded to earlier, that we're very excited about, very much looking forward to, which is the introduction of support for native database disaster recovery, starting with Oracle, basically using DataGuard. And what this does is it gives users the ability to identify their disaster recovery configurations and provision them from within NDB. This is fully accessible via CLI API as well as the UI. It's very configurable. You can identify different parameters of your configuration, including support for cascaded standby and multiple standby configurations. You can do things like monitoring lag, initiate failovers, as well as switchovers and switchbacks, so that you can get your disaster recovery drills covered all within NDB's APIs and CLI and UI. We'll give you an actual demo of this a little bit later. Suffice it to say that with the simplicity that you get in the user interface, as well as the ease of automation, it's very much a game changer for your day-to-day operations.
Great, thank you, Mohammed. So I'm going to just go on to the next feature. So this is the time machine enhancement. So this is just a quick screenshot of the type of visibility you get at a cluster level. You get detailed information about where all your storage is being consumed for at the Nutanix cluster level from NDB across snapshots, clones, log backups, anything like that. You can drill into individual database servers, like I said, and you can see for a given database where all the space is going as well. So it becomes a really nice way to have visibility. So this is an area where we're always taking feedback. There's areas for improvement. We'll definitely take it, but we've taken a lot of feedback from customers over the last couple of quarters, and And this has been through multiple iterations of scripts and tooling, and eventually kind of made its way into the GUI. So hopefully you all will appreciate that, and it'll give you a lot more visibility from a capacity planning perspective, and knowing just how much space your backups are taking. Um, the other key thing that I wanted to highlight, and this is not directly tied to the 2.9 release, but I think is something really important, is that between 2A, the last release, and this release, we partnered with Cohesity, and they, as part of the Nutanix Ready program, they did joint interoperability testing, working with our engineering teams to validate that they could back up Postgres side by side with us backing up Postgres. And this came about as a result of some customers that had requirements for multiple vendors to be involved with the backup and recovery. So we basically worked with them, and so I just provided a link here to the blog where they go into more details. But if you're using Cohesity, you can use NDB and Cohesity together to use NDB Time Machine for snapshotting and cloning and quick recovery, and Cohesity for your long-term archiving and backup as a second backup model. And that is an area that Raghu, who's also on the call, has been actively driving with other backup partners. So expect to see more of that type of interoperability and multi-vendor collaboration in the future. I briefly mentioned this. This is the GUI of just an example of what MySQL availability will look like. But I kind of talked about this earlier. The basic idea is that now with NDB 2.9, you can provision highly available MySQL clusters, fully GA, ready to be used in production. This is limited to API CLI today. The UI is on the roadmap, as well as other functionality like scaling and patching and stuff that we have planned to come and follow-up releases. We are intentionally following many industry best practices, both from a performance and tuning perspective, as well as best of breed components on the open source side, such as use of NODB, group replication for MySQL replication, and the use of MySQL router for load balancing and traffic redirection. And Mohammed is the PM driving that whole effort. So if there's additional questions, I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. But I'm very excited about that roadmap and what we're going to do with MySQL in the future. Okay, so let's talk about SQL Server. So for some of you that may know, we've traditionally in NDB, we've had this model where you need to create if you want to back up a database, you create a time machine for that database. And so the individual schedule and retention defined for that specific time machine. So you had to basically define that separately for each database. And then about a year ago, we introduced this concept of grouping so that you could basically create a group and you could add multiple SQL Server databases into the same group. And then that group would basically, you could define a standard schedule for when that group of databases is backed up and how long those backups were retained and where are those backups set. What we've now done is we've extended that so you can have up to 5 groups, and they're completely logical. They're not based on any kind of physical boundaries that, such as where disks are sitting, where the databases are sitting on disks, or which always on groups they may be sitting on. You basically have flexibility to create logical groups based on what makes sense to you, maybe based on your application or other things like that. And so you can now have flexibility to back up many more databases. This has the added benefit of addressing some challenges that we've seen in the past with taking multiple snapshots on the same Windows host due to limitations with Microsoft volume shadow copy services. So now we're able to basically take multiple staggered snapshots all around the same time frame for example, for a database server that has many databases. Like now we can support up to 175 databases per SQL Server host. So that gives us the ability to back up much significantly more dense database environments than we could in the past. It also is a lot easier way to manage backups of SQL Server, especially if you don't need an individual backup policy for every database. If you just want one policy for the entire database server, or maybe for like, maybe your prod databases and maybe a different backup policy for some of your test databases, you now have a lot more flexibility to kind of group things together. I briefly highlighted some of the security enhancements, but I didn't cover everything. So I'll kind of cover some of these. So if you're using Oracle, Postgres, or Mongo on Linux, you now can deploy your OS. You can enable SE Linux enforcing mode, and NDB will work. There was a lot of improvements and code changes we had to make on our end to support that. But basically, it means NDB can run in a highly locked down environment now, using stringent security policies like this. The second thing is on the Windows side, again, you can use HTTPS for all of your communications. So there's a couple of areas where NDB does rely on WinRM to initially install software and to do some software updates and things like that on the Windows database server, the SQL Server database server. So now all that is over an encrypted path. And the last thing I wanted to highlight is not something I mentioned earlier, but because it's not really tied to the 2.9 release, but it's something that's important because it's now available, and we had not talked about it in the last tech talk. And that is Nutanix has a website called the NXBD website, which I provided the link for, which has been long available. And what it does is it lists all of the Nutanix products, and it basically identifies any CVEs for known CVEs based on the version of the Nutanix product. NDB is now has its data published in there for every release as well. So you can now go to this single portal and you can see NDB as well as AOS and everything else, and you can see here's the known CVEs for a given release. So I just thought that would be useful. It's a quick way for you to see what we have identified as security risks, even if they're minor, as part of the release process. Okay. Last thing is backup recovery. So the idea here is that there's now some tooling. It's actually covered on our user guide to explain it, but there's some scripts that are on the NDB control plane virtual machine, and you can run those scripts as part of a cron job or maybe manually or called from an external automation like Ansible to effectively take a backup of NDB itself, of all the metadata, all the configuration, everything about in DB. Not the database servers themselves, but the actual control plane, the management, the actual DB. And that backup can be stored in any S3 compatible object store. And once it's there, you can then recover it. So we have customers as an example where they drop it into a bucket in their object store, they enable worm on their object store so that the backups are immutable. And then in the event that they ever have a ransomware compromise or something like that, they can follow a process, a documented process to restore from that backup, and effectively recreate NDB with all the metadata intact before the ransomware happens. So this is a very, very powerful capability. We'll probably continue to make enhancements to this over time. But I just want to highlight that this has been a really, really amazing capability that many of our customers are now taking advantage of because it gives them that comfort and being able to fully recover ADB if they need to. Okay. Just really quickly, from a OS and a database engine support perspective, we now are supporting Windows 2. Server 2025. We also made some enhancements, and you'll have to go to our release notes for more details. But we have made some enhancements around version support for Oracle with RHEL and with OEL 9.x, and also some newer sort of minor Oracle versions. We also did some additional testing around Postgres with Ubuntu, and also minor Postgres version updates. Same thing for Mongo. We added MySQL to 8.4 support. And then on the infra side, as of this release, we're officially supporting AOS 7.3, PC 7.3, and Objects 5.1. We are working on Objects 5.2 support, but that requires more development effort. So that's something we're targeting for the next release after this. And there's a few older systems that are no longer supported by ADB. So if you are running on those, things won't break. It's not like it's going to be broken, but we're no longer testing it. So you definitely should upgrade to make sure that you're taking care of the latest and you're getting the right security updates and whatnot. So that specifically if you're using an older version of AOS like 6.8, you need to make sure you upgrade. Likewise, if you're using older versions of RHEL and objects, to make sure you upgrade as soon as you can. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to Mohammed and he's going to do a live presentation. So Mohammed, since I'm controlling the slides, you just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide.
Thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Okay, so this is a bit of a deeper dive and also ending with a demo. So I'll start by giving you a little bit more details. Jeremy, in the next slide, we can share with folks basically a very high level overview of what this new functionality will provide and enable them to do. So in terms of disaster recovery, there's a set of topologies that are going to be supported via DataGuard. We basically support just having a single standby as well as cascaded multiple standbys. Cascaded standbys are interesting in the sense that workloads are benefited by using them when you need to have your third environment or your third node receiving redo logs from the second node, as opposed to having both of your disaster recovery nodes taking redo logs directly from your primary, thereby offloading the primary somewhat. So it's a popular configuration that is very often used and beneficial for that type of workload. If you do not have that requirement, what usually happens is you end up deploying a multiple standby configuration, which is the third one on that slide. All of these are supported, and we'll show you how some of them work in the demo as well. Jeremy, we can go on to the next one. Perfect. So I mentioned the fact that there's we can go all the way up until a cascaded configuration, but within those layers or tiers of a disaster recovery configuration, multiple types of Oracle databases are supported within specific configurations. So for instance, if your primary starts off being a single instance database, then the standby is also constrained to be a single instance database, as is the cascaded system. The constraint sort of holds also for CHA databases for single instance high availability. But with RAC, you have a little bit more flexibility. With RAC, you can either perpetuate that RAC attribute across your standby and your cascaded databases, or you could fall back to a CHA if that's what your business continuity plans demand. Next slide, please, Jeremy. Perfect. So I'll walk you through this in the demo, but basically what's happening is for your workflow to create a disaster recovery configuration, the number one thing that needs to happen is when you've identified a primary, we collect a set of information from that primary database that is then used to help define the topology options that you can select for the rest of the topology. So those constraints are then sort of illustrated in your ability to select certain VMs and create standby databases on them. And then DataGuard is actually set up and they're registered. And at the end of that process, you will have your disaster recovery configuration set up within DataGuard. Next slide, please, Jeremy. Okay, so long-time DataGuard users will probably be familiar with this slide. Basically, there are multiple methods of replication supported within DataGuard. There is basically based on the type of synchronization that is established between the primary and the standby, not only in terms of the way the logs are transferred, but also in terms of how those logs are processed by the standby. So for maximum protection, a transaction is not considered committed until two things happen. A, the redo logs are sent to the standby, and they are applied and confirmed by the standby. So that's the highest protection, as the name implies, that you can get within your configuration. It also, because of that additional weight, may not be the most performance favoring option. So that's why the other two options are provided for, depending on the workload in question. Max availability is different in the sense that basically you get the synchronization of the logs as well, and the application of the logs is not something that you wait on with availability. So they may be applied, but that's not a guarantee that you're receiving in that configuration. For maximum performance, it's basically just an asynchronous send of the logs. You don't wait for either the logs or the transaction applied confirmation to come in that replication mode. So again, it gives you very high performance at that configuration, if you will, trade-off. Next slide, please, Jeremy. Right. So a similar arrangement exists also for the multiple standby configuration. And the difference here is basically that the same relationship propagates to both of your standby nodes, whereas previously it was a serial cascade of how those synchronous and asynchronous writes are propagated to your first standby and then your second standby in a cascaded setup as well. Next slide, please, Jeremy.
Oh, I think this is the last slide.
Oh,
Let's jump
perfect.
over to a demo.
Excellent. So the next slide is the demo, in
Okay,
which case,
I'm gonna flip it over to you so you can share your screen.
perfect. Thank you. Give me 1 second. Okay, so I will now show you what this experience looks like firsthand in on the actual system from the UI. Folks on the call are probably familiar with this overall dashboard. What has happened now is that basically there is a new feature, there's a new selection that is available in the data protection section. So if you select this, you will immediately find two things. First of all, the list of already available disaster recovery configurations. As you can see, we had prepared a cascaded configuration here for illustration. And what you can then do is you can create additional configurations. As we said, currently it is only supported for Oracle Data Guard. When you do that, it tells you about some basic constraints that you should be pursuing. Like, for example, if it's a disaster recovery configuration, it is important for you to select a different fault domain for the secondary database than the primary. And then you can go ahead and start, configuring your specific configuration information. In this case, let's go with the Tech Talk demo configuration. And as we had alluded to earlier, you need to start by selecting a primary database. So we're going to select this one. And let's say we're going to go with maximum availability in terms of replication. Again, you have all the options. And then you pick what you're going to do for the secondary database. If it's going to be a single instance, in this case, we're going to select a different cluster. And then we are going to go with, let's say, Tech Talk DB Server VM. And we're going to select a network profile that is aligned and suitable for that cluster. And we can then move on to database specifics. So far, so good. And then obviously you select your parameter profile from the ones that you had configured earlier. Let's go with the default time machine specification. You can obviously change those and add some tags for tracking in the future. And then it gives you a preview of what you're about to provision. Now, remember, folks, you all have access to this via the demo service on the demo.nutanix.com URL. And once we've confirmed that this is to our liking, let's go ahead and create this. And it'll tell you that it's starting off. And you can track its progress in the operations view. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. I'll remind everybody the demo site is basically just that. It's a demonstration. So this is a representation of what the UI would look like. It's not actually creating databases in this actual experience. So that's why you will see that the simulation of the UI is relatively rapid. So the operation is now done. You can check what the progress of the specific steps in that operation are. For diagnostic purposes, you can get a log bundle. But for the time being, since it's all been created successfully, let's go and check it out. So you will see now that we have two configurations, just that simple. This one is a very straightforward configuration that we saw earlier. If we wanted to, we could also go ahead and add a second node here for multiple standby. But for the time being, I actually wanted to show you something else, which is the previous configuration. Again, a feature many people were asking for. This was created with a cascaded standby configuration. And as you can see, these are all the nodes that are part of it. The next thing I want to show you is, now that you've been able to create this in a very straightforward manner, let's also see how you can use this in your day-to-day operations. So the first thing we want to do is let's select one of these additional actions. As folks on the call know, a failover is what happens when your primary node is basically out of commission. And a switchover is like a deliberate planned event where you are deciding that you want to switch the primary um, under healthy conditions where you can control basically a database acquiesce operation, and you are not expecting any data loss. So let's try that now. And it'll give you like a quick warning asking you, to make sure that as a requirement, you are going in with zero delay and no replication lag, because if either of those two conditions are in place, then the switchover operation per se doesn't work. So in this case, let's actually take a moment to think about our options. We could switch over to either nodes in the cascade, either the first one, which as you can see in the interface here, was called investments, or the cascaded standby, which is HCM. I'm going to go with the first one, although I could easily choose the second one. Just as a confirmation, I'm going to type in switch over. And if there was a password, I'd have to sort of enter that as well. Before I do this, though, I want to emphasize something. And again, folks are probably very familiar with this, but it is a really big enabler for many of our customers, which is the API equivalent screen. You can trigger this in most operations, and it will be very useful also for customers that have heavy automations or the reliance on automations in their workflows, and who may have their own front ends, for example. If you use the UI in the way that we've been doing it right now, it basically is a catalyst for the way that you're able to have productive automated workflows. And the reason I say this is because I'll take a segue to an anecdote that we've been picking up from many of our users, as we can indicated by conversations that we've had with them, as well as sort of the usage patterns that they've been asking for. Fully sort of perhaps more than half of our users have a very heavy reliance on the APIs and CLI automations. And for those users, the UI is really an initial enabler where you go ahead and use this as a very sort of interactive manual, if you will, to discover the features. And then you click on this API equivalent button, you take the JSON payloads and you use them to inform your own automations. And then dramatically your capabilities to perform database automation as a sort of a factory, an automation powerhouse, have dramatically been improved. So again, just a big call out to the API equivalent functionality there. Everything else has been put in place. We're ready to start the switchover. So remember, this was a switchover operation that we were going to apply to the investments database server. It's telling us that it is now in progress. Let's monitor how it's going on. We're almost done. So I guess by the time we go back to disaster recovery, it may be already finished. And remember, this was for the cascaded rack configuration, and it is already complete. And you'll find out that right now your primary has in fact been switched to investments. CRM has been switched to all the way down, and HCM is now in the middle. So we've just concluded this switchover operation. It is it's going so far so good, but there's one more thing I really want to see if we can squeeze in. Jeremy, if I may, I want to show folks how we can extend this configuration to also support multiple standby, or give a multiple standby configuration. So let's do that very quickly. We're going to add a new secondary, and that's an incremental process. And when you do that, it asks you if you want it to have to be established in a cascaded configuration or multiple secondary. We already have a cascaded configuration. So let me show you this one. Again, no surprises there. You just need to select your database. Let's go with, in this case, see if we can go with Tomahawk. You can pick whichever cluster that you have access to. And I am getting a blank out. Let me see if I can, 1 second.
Lovely demo site. Hey, Mohammed, there's a question for you. Maybe we can skip this last one. You can just answer one of the questions. So the question
Sure.
was from Colin, and the question was, when you're doing your testing, can you ring fence the test environment so that the source environment can still be active and running?
When you're doing the testing, that's actually a really good question. So in general, what happens is for the primary, there is a quiesce operation. So that does happen. If we want to apply additional ring fencing to the source, we would need to actually apply a different procedure than what we have running currently, because basically there is a switch happening between the primary and the secondary. It is possible to also to apply different configurations, but depending on how you want the ring fencing to happen, Colin, perhaps reach out to me and we can sort of work out the details, and I'll let you know if it's supported currently or if it's something that we need to add to the backlog.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mohammed. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah. And just a quick note, sorry, the about the screen blanking. Basically, we were a couple of steps away from making the multiple standby. By the way, this was an artifact. There's probably a cookie on my browser, but this is just an artifact of the demo site. That does not happen with the actual production demo, the
Yeah,
production
we all
configuration.
love like demos.
Yeah.
Uh, Great. Thank you very much. Yeah. So I think there's maybe one more question you can take offline. So guys, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and I have we're pretty much at the end of this session, but what I'd uh, what I'd like to hopefully you guys are all seeing the right session. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to just quick throw up a couple of poll questions for you. I have to say that these questions are not really related to the session. They're a little bit more to help guide us in terms of future sort of roadmap direction. But I thought it would be useful to kind of um, share some of the share what we're thinking. So let me see if I can just put that up on the screen, and I'll give you guys a minute. If you can just quickly go through and answer, and then I'll share the results for everybody afterwards. Okay, it's been about a minute. Let me go ahead and wrap up the poll, and I'll just show everybody what we got there. That's some interesting results. Interesting results. It looks like the first question was about whether or not anybody had any plans to run databases and containers, and kind of mostly no, or possibly a little bit of maybe, so a little bit of exploration. I think that's interesting. It turns out we actually are starting to investigate that ourselves, and we're kicking off some efforts to see what it would be like to support running databases and containers. And so, if there's any interest from anybody here, we definitely like to talk with you and better understand how your use cases would overlap with what we're thinking about. Another question we asked was about vector databases. And it seems like the answer is not yet for the most part, with maybe one exception. That's also helpful. Um, I got resounding answers on the types of database engine support. You'd love to have NDB support in the future. Redis and Elasticsearch came in pretty top of the list, so that's good to know. And then and I think another really interesting feedback is we were just kind of related to this session that because I think in the NDB team we have a very strong philosophy that that there is significant reason to support database native DR. And so we wanted to kind of test that out. And you saw what we've just done with Oracle, right? We're looking to extend that to other database engines. But this last poll I think is interesting because it really is trying to figure out, well, how many people really care about that? Where people actually care about infra, which people don't really care. And so it seems like the majority is in support of native database DR, with about 25% that prefer infra, and then 30% they don't really care as long as the RPO and RTO requirements are met. So I think that's very helpful for us to figure out, well, at some point, do we need to support infra level DR as well as an option, or is it sufficient to continue just to keep working on database support for different database engines? So thank you all for your time on that one. I want to wrap up today's session with just one. I want to thank you. Well, so actually, we'll do a couple things. One is I just want to kind of quickly flash this link. You're welcome to check it out. This is a link to a blog that we recently posted on 2.9. It went live this morning. So there's a QR code to scan, or you can just type in the URL directly. But that will take you to a blog post where you learn more about 2.9 and the release and what's new in it, as well as more information. So feel free to take a look at that if you'd like to learn more about the release. And now we can open it up to Q&A. So it looks like a fair amount of questions were answered offline. I'm just gonna see if there's anything in particular. Raghu or Mohammed, is there anything that you guys would like me to repeat and do more verbal?
Jeremy, there are
You there, Mohammed?
Yeah, I think there's
If we-
a on the webinar chat, Jeremy, if you would want to take it. In general, I think the question is on Leap, right? Nutanix Leap, and
Mhm.
our strategy that for automated failover, failback for Oracle databases. So
if can folks hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead,
yeah,
Mohammed.
Okay,
If
perfect.
can you respond to that one?
Yes, yes. So I do see the two questions there. Thank you for raising those, Raghu. So the first one for Leap, that was the question that we were asking about, sort of like the infrastructure-based integration versus native database disaster recovery. And to reiterate what Jeremy was saying, we are starting off with native database disaster recovery. So for example, via DataGuard for Oracle, Leap integration is on our backlog, but to respond to the current the market demand, we did start with the native database disaster recovery. If folks are interested in Leap-based recovery, please do connect with us, and we are going to continue to prioritize that accordingly. So absolutely something we're aware of and looking forward to sort of supporting. The second question was, does NDB natively support Oracle database disaster recovery across separate Nutanix clusters in different sites? Absolutely. In the demo, I don't know if people had a chance to notice, but one of the very first questions it asks you as you're setting up the disaster recovery node is where that cluster that you want that disaster recovery node to reside should be. And in fact, one of the first screens that we show in that UI, if you're using the UI experience, is a heads up and a request for users to select different clusters. So yeah, in short, the answer to Abdullah's question is yes, absolutely. It does support DR across separate Nutanix clusters in different sites.
I think,
There's
Mohammed,
another
there was
question,
also
I
a
think.
question about any specific licensing. to support multi-site
Yes,
Oracle
yes,
DR.
yes. Great. So again, so Jeremy, I know you're here and you're a licensing person, but I'll take a quick stab at this, and please, feel free to provide
Well,
any.
maybe you can highlight if there's anything specific on the Oracle side, and then I think I can talk about anything on the Nutanix
Absolutely,
side.
absolutely. So in short, no, there is nothing specific that happens with this. In brief, basically, NDB doesn't change your licensing posture. It basically allows you just to use your features in a more straightforward manner, and there is nothing that changes by virtue of your usage of a disaster recovery topology configuration. Jeremy, would you like to add any clarifications there, details?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. Like, yeah, if your Oracle license supports it, you're entitled to do it. If it doesn't, you're not entitled to do it. That's the way you should think of it. There's no, because this is database level replication, database level failover. It's not like we're using any specific NDB or AOS level functionality that requires a different version of NDB or a different version of AOS to support that. This is entirely tied to your Oracle license entitlements and what it's capable of doing. Okay, fantastic. Let's see if there's any other questions. I think nothing else on the webinar chat, which is good. We'll just quickly kind of go back to the Q&A. And I don't see any other questions on the Q&A side. So I think this has been very good. There was actually a couple of questions earlier. One guy, I think somebody was asking, well, why would they use NDB to do anything with databases instead of just managing and provisioning on their own? So I did give her a canned response, but I'll just kind of highlight it again. So really, the reason why our customers like to use NDB is because one, it provides a single pane of glass for managing their database estate across different database engines. Two, it works across on-prem and cloud the same way. So the way you build, patch, upgrade works the same way. Three, it automates the lifecycle management. So the provisioning is provisioned with best practices, so you get optimal performance on Nutanix out of the box. You don't have to follow our best practice guides, which are very, very good, but very detailed and lengthy. It takes care of OS and database patching, you know, cloning with automated refreshes, which is great if you have to duplicate data into test environments or downstream secondary environments. Non-disruptive database storage scaling, and we can't forget time machine, which basically is the really key for many of our customers, and that's where you really can use it for like rapid recovery. So we have examples of customers like Wells Fargo as an example, where they're able to recover 40 terabytes in about 6 minutes, right? So that's something that's near impossible with traditional backup recovery.
Jeremy, there's a question specifically on licensing, NDB
Yeah.
licensing. Then you take that question.
Yeah, so is there an NCI license required in addition to NDB licenses, or should the NDB licenses be applied directly to the cluster? That's a great question. So I'll try to answer that. So we actually support both. So you just buy one NDB license, and if you foundation to the cluster and it has not been, if there's no license has been applied to it, you can apply an NDB license on every physical core in the cluster, and the whole cluster will gain full unlimited NDB functionality on that hardware, and as well as NCI ultimate functionality. So you can, if it's never been licensed, you can license NDB directly on the entire cluster, and you have a fully functioning cluster with all the NDB functionality. If you've already licensed the cluster with NCI and maybe you're using it for other workloads besides databases, then you can add the NDB licenses on top of NCI, and you can just license by the amount of vCPUs of the database servers that you're managing. So it's more of an add-on approach, but it's a single NDB license, and you can switch between the different licensing modes of whether you want to use the cluster entirely for managing databases or whether you want to run a mix of databases and non-database workloads on the same cluster. So hopefully that answers your question, but the intent here is you have flexibility. You can reapply your licenses however you need to, and that not only extends to those two models on-prem, but you can also take the licenses that you're running on-prem and you can run those in the cloud, or vice versa. So you have a lot of flexibility to take your licensing and apply it anyway you need to.
Jeremy, if I may move on to a previous question, just to add a little bit more detail. There was a question coming in from Ahmed Faraj about which type of high availability cluster is supported on Nutanix NDB, if it's NODB cluster or NDB cluster for MySQL. For MySQL, what we're doing exactly is the following. As folks know, MySQL has several different variants and implementation options. We are using the InnoDB storage engine with group replication cluster for HA. Obviously, those group replication clusters are, where do they ultimately reside? They reside on NDB clusters, but they are implemented using group replication for MySQL, using the InnoDB storage engine. I hope that adds the clarity that folks were looking for. And again, feel free to keep those questions coming in.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. All right, well, I think if there's no other questions, we can wrap up the call. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for attending today. I think this has been, we really love hearing from you, and hopefully you appreciated learning more about NDB 2.9. We'll keep it coming. I know we have more tech talks coming fast and furious, and they're not always tied to a specific release. Sometimes they're in specific subject matters. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, Mohammed did a tech talk specifically on everything HA, database HA. And I know Raghu, who's also on the call, who did multiple tech talks on Time Machine and deep dives around data protection and recovery models. And so we'll have more of those specialty focused tech talks in the future, as well as continuing to do a tech talk for every release of NDB so that you could be informed. So thank you everyone for your time and participation. We really appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.